Good evening. I'm Jim Lehrer in Washington.
And I'm Robert MacNeil in New York. After tonight's news summary, we have a debate on the changing U.S. role in Somalia. Then part two of Charles Krause's look at Muslim life in America. Finally, correspondent Elizabeth Brackett goes back to people she visited in the Midwest floods to report on their recovery.
New York Life is proud to provide funding for the MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour. Yet another example of New York Life's wise investment philosophy. Funding has also been provided by PepsiCo. And by the Archer Daniels Midland Company. ADM, supermarket to the world. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
Defense Secretary Les Aspin said today that U.S. combat troops would not leave Somalia until security is restored to the country's capital, Mogadishu. Some 400 elite Army Rangers have been arriving there over the last 2 days. They're reinforcing 1,400 members of a U.S. quick reaction force already in Somalia. Pentagon officials did not deny reports that some were members of Delta Force, a counterterrorism unit, but they said they were not a hit squad sent for warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid, as had been reported. Aidid's followers have been blamed for killing 4 U.S. peacekeeping troops earlier this month and 24 Pakistanis in June. Hundreds of Somali women and children took to the streets today to protest the U.S. troop presence. In Washington, Secretary Aspin spoke about the new mission.
The danger now is that unless we return security to South Mogadishu, political chaos will follow any UN withdrawal. Other warlords would follow Aidid's example. Fighting between the warlords will ensue, and that, of course, is what brought the famine to massive proportions in the first place.
We'll have more on the U.S. involvement in Somalia after the news summary. Jim? A UN aid convoy and about 150 peacekeepers remain stranded today in the southern Bosnian city of Mostar. They have been prevented from leaving by Muslim refugees afraid of renewed Croat attacks. But as Jim Buchanan of Independent Television News reports from Mostar, several wounded children were allowed to go after a British nurse intervened on their behalf. A word of caution, Buchanan's report contains graphic pictures.
Sally Becker comforting 3 of the children she brought out of Mostar today, upstaging the UN, who can't persuade the Muslim authorities to allow their aid convoy to leave. Among them, a boy and his sister horribly injured by a mortar attack.
First, yeah.
But the UN was furious Sally was leaving without the convoy. They'd hoped to use her mission as a lever for the lorries to get out too.
But I have only got my ceasefire until 1 o'clock. After that, I have no permission.
Where are you going without coordination?
Today, increasingly, it seems, the UN has been a victim of a Muslim plan to provide a human shield against further Croat attacks. The food it brought has been left untouched in the warehouse, and there's little evidence of the imminent starvation predicted by the UN. Civilians who block the road every time the convoy tries to leave get at least 1 meal a day. But there's no doubt life is very hard for the Muslims. Snipers are active at the town's famous old bridge where water has to be collected straight from the river.
Sniper!
People are sleeping 30 to a room in basements to protect them against nightly shelling. And every day the latest casualties of the war ready for burial with swiftly prepared headstones. Sally drove her children out of the misery that is Mostar, leaving the convoy still stranded. But the children's places have already been taken in the town's hospital. These 2 were brought in this morning after another mortar attack.
Separate assemblies of Muslims and Serbs today debated the latest proposed peace plan for Bosnia. The country's Muslim president predicted his parliament would vote to amend the plan, which was proposed by international mediators in Geneva. Bosnian Serb leaders were said to be pressuring deputies in their assembly to accept the plan. It would divide Bosnia into 3 ethnic states, with Serbs getting more than half of the republic.
And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now it's on to the Somalia dilemma, part 2 of Muslims in America, and an update on some people who fought the flood. We go first tonight to part 2 of our Muslims in America series. Last night, correspondent Charles Krause reported on the terrorist elements that exist within the larger, growing Muslim community. Tonight, he looks at how the American Muslims struggle to maintain their identities here.
Where do you find Muslims in America? Today, almost anywhere you choose to look for them. In a New Jersey steel plant where Ali Jaber is a valued worker. Yet despite more than 20 years in the United States, he remains so close to his Palestinian roots he didn't even bother to become an American citizen until last year. Muslims also live in suburban America, Long Island, where doctors Farouk and Arfa Khan say outwardly their lives are no different than those of their affluent neighbors. Yet the Khans say they struggle every day to maintain a footing in two cultures. By any definition, Muslims in America are diverse and vibrant. There are no agreed-upon statistics, but it's estimated there are now 4 to 7 million Muslims in the United States. And today, Islam is probably the fastest-growing religion in the country. At least a third of the country's Muslims are black, converts from Christianity. Many others are recent immigrants from Jordan, Turkey, Syria, Pakistan, the West Bank, and other Muslim countries around the globe. Filled with promise and paradox, Muslims in the United States are united by religion, but often torn by politics and tradition. Today, they're a community struggling to adapt and to find a place in America. Vincent Perillo is a sociologist who studied the large Muslim community in northern New Jersey.
Obviously, Americanization occurs, first of all, because when people give up, as I said before, on those old dreams and old traditions, and come here to the United States, they don't come to join nothing. They come to join something. And so they learn our language, they learn our ways, and they do try to fit in. But at the same time, there is this recognition that you are what you are in terms of your roots and your heritage. And so it's a blend.
This is the Islamic Center of Long Island, nestled among split-level homes half an hour from Kennedy Airport. It's a good example of the kind of mosque starting to appear in affluent suburban neighborhoods, alongside the churches and synagogues that have existed for generations. The new mosque, just finished this year, was built from scratch at a cost of $2 million, all of it paid in cash because the Islamic faith prohibits interest payments. One recent morning, there were services for Eid al-Fitr, a major holiday celebrating the end of fasting for the month of Ramadan. So the crowds were bigger than usual, and the dress more traditional. Allahu Akbar. The setting may have been Long Island, but the faithful here share many of the same ancient beliefs as Muslims from Casablanca to Karachi, to Mecca itself, home of the Grand Mosque, the city where Islam began 1,300 years ago. All pious Muslims are expected to make a pilgrimage called a Hajj to Mecca, at least once during their lifetimes if they can. That's one of the 5 central pillars of the faith. Another is prayer. Practicing Muslims are commanded to pray 5 times a day, although not necessarily in a mosque. Even so, it's difficult in Western countries. Many Muslims are torn between their need to pray and their busy lives and work schedules. At the Long Island Islamic Center and many other mosques in America, prayers are in Arabic, sermons in English.
So you exercise this control, you exercise this discipline on yourself.
Leading the prayer is an imam, often formally trained in religion, but not always. This imam also works as a physicist. By tradition, only men are allowed in the main prayer hall. Women must worship in a separate section of the mosque. In Long Island, the service is broadcast by loudspeaker. Other mosques use video. Because this was a holiday, people lingered after services. There was food and they met with friends. Many of the younger worshippers had just finished fasting for Ramadan, while keeping up a full schedule in high school. That's another example of something most American Muslims share, a need and a desire to adapt their beliefs and practices to normal, everyday life in the United States. Sports, for example. How to reconcile the Islamic tradition of modest dress for women with American softball. In Paterson, New Jersey, we found that some Muslim girls play in long pants despite the heat. Others, especially younger girls, still wear shorts. They're all American citizens born in the United States, but most of their parents are Palestinians born in the Middle East.
What do you like about baseball?
It's fun. You bat, you play, you catch the balls, you throw the balls, do anything you want. Coaches are very nice to us. Every time we miss it, they like cheer us up and stuff. They always say, come on, you could do better. And then instead of just us trying out, they help us.
What happened, though, during Ramadan? Do you all fast?
Yeah.
Were you able to play sports?
Yes.
It didn't bother you to...
No. That's how we have to do. The only reason why we fast for Ramadan is that because we have to feel like what the people in Palestine are feeling when they don't have no food.
The homeless people, how they're feeling. They want us to feel what they're feeling. When they don't have
you shouldn't
food.
be mad about it or nothing. Just you have to do it.
Rowena Jaber lives in a 3-story house across the street from one of Paterson's aging factories, like the one where her father has worked ever since he came to Paterson from the Israeli-occupied West Bank 20 years ago. Ali Jaber never bothered to become an American citizen until last year, when he needed a passport to visit his mother in a hospital back home. Like many other first-generation immigrants, Jaber has resisted assimilating to life in the United States.
We met your daughter playing softball. She looks like just any other American kid.
She might look, yes. But if you ask her of anything, she will tell you no. Yeah. That's what my parents are, and that's what I am.
Ali Jaber's marriage was arranged by his parents many years ago, and his wife still wears the traditional headscarf called a hijab. Like many other first-generation women in the neighborhood, she was shy and didn't want to talk much. The Jaber's cousins, Anwar and Omar Khalil, on the other hand, were more comfortable with our visit. Omar's a baker, and Anwar stays at home with their new baby. The day we first met them, they were packing to move to a larger apartment. Despite their more open attitude, the Khalil's marriage was also worked out, though not exactly arranged, by their parents.
How did you and Omar meet? How did you get together?
We didn't meet.
My father, he called here on the phone and he asked for her.
He talked
then
to
she
my
came
father.
there and her father, he told her, if you like him, you get mad, and if you don't like him,
you come back.
You come back.
So you went back to
Palestine.
Yeah, she came
They paid
there.
for my ticket, and I went with my mother and some cousins. I didn't want to, like the first week, and then they talked me into it, and then I went overseas, and I met him. Actually, as soon as I met him, I liked him. And in the 2 years, we went out with each other. We liked each other more and more, and then we got married. If we didn't like each other or didn't agree with each other, we would have not gotten married.
The Jabers and the Khalils live just 16 miles from the glitter of Manhattan. Yet here in South Paterson, the large and growing Muslim community has begun to make its presence felt in what was once an Irish and Jewish neighborhood. Within just a few blocks of Main Street, there are now a dozen or so mosques, located in converted churches, converted synagogues, storefronts, and even a converted factory. The Muslim population is heavily Palestinian with a smattering of Turks, big enough to keep the production lines humming at Fattal Brothers' pita factory. Fattal's began as a neighborhood bakery, then expanded as Muslims by the tens of thousands moved to northern New Jersey. With its rich mixture of ethnic restaurants and shops, South Paterson is a classic urban ethnic neighborhood. It's also a place where you can watch immigrant and American ways meeting and adapting, or partly adapting, or not adapting at all. Here, for example, outside PS 9, which serves the neighborhood. It's one of the most Islamic public schools in the country, 48% Muslim. It provides a glimpse of what other U.S. schools may face if the Islamic population in this country continues to grow.
Nazreen, do you feel like you're an American or do you feel like you're Palestinian?
Palestinian.
Most of the time I fluent in Turkish.
Palestinian. To both.
I'm not surprised by their response at all. Their ethnicity is an everyday real event in terms of language, in foods, in religion, in values, in customs, and so forth. All of them are acculturating, but they feel themselves as strangers in a strange land, really identifying themselves as outsiders right now.
Hatırlaysın. Bunu bulacaktın. Bunu bulacaktın. Make your fours the way I like them.
To help them make the transition, PS9 conducts regular classes using English as a second language. But there's more being taught than just English and math. The teacher, Sky Bayram, is also a Muslim, the daughter of an earlier generation of Turkish emigres. She left a career in advertising to teach at PS9 because she hopes to be a role model for this new generation of immigrant children who've come to Patterson. But it sometimes seems as if PS9 itself has had to assimilate as much as the students.
Right. And what religion are the Serbs? Christians, right. And what religion are the Croatians? They're Christians also.
The school has had to adapt, for example, to teaching geography and social studies to students who often know more about certain parts of the world than their teachers do.
So have you actually lived in Palestine?
Yeah,
And what happened to you there? Did you see soldiers?
a lot.
Did you hear gunfire and
Bombs.
bombs too?
Every day we go to school, some soldiers come to school and start hitting bullets.
At PS9, the principal, Margaret Dalton, has to deal with problems most educators never see, like the complicated feelings many of her students had during the Gulf War.
Before school opened, we kind of tried to think through what would be some of the actions that youngsters may take. And of course, one of them would be not standing for the flag salute in the morning. We had two youngsters who just didn't stand. They couldn't do it. And so we brought them down to the office and to the counselor's office, and she interacted with them and so we simply asked them to consider just standing and not having to do the salute itself, which is what solved the problem.
But it doesn't take a war to set off inner battles. Dr. Farouk Khan and his family seem to have adapted brilliantly to life in the United States. Both he and his wife were born into privileged families in Kashmir, then came to the United States to be educated. Dr. Arfa Khan now practices medicine at Long Island Jewish Hospital, where she pioneered a new technique for diagnosing breast cancer. Her husband is now chief of medicine at nearby Nassau County Medical Center. Yet despite their many years in the United States, the Khans say they're still adjusting.
We have a jihad every day. Jihad means struggle for improvement. We have been planted from one culture into another culture. To maintain that culture, to continue with that, is a struggle for us on a day-to-day basis. Social interaction, political all kinds of interaction. So I think most of the immigrants you'll feel have a sense of that belonging, of having lost their roots, of having lost their connection, the social ambience.
For your interest,
the subtle drama of accommodation works itself out differently in different situations. The Khans, for example, helped raise cash to build the new Long Island Islamic Center because they didn't think it would be appropriate to borrow money and pay interest to build a mosque. But they worked out a different solution when it came time to buy their own home.
Now, if I had the means and I had the cash up front, I would have purchased this house with cash down. But I didn't have it, so I had to make that adjustment. So for this house, we took a loan, took a mortgage, and we're paying it off like millions of other Americans. But for the mosque, now that's the house of God, we decided that we will not do that. We will chip in extra, buy it, and pay for it up front.
But that seems like a perfectly reasonable compromise, but a compromise nonetheless between what the religion says and the society that you're living in.
On the other hand, I know a number of Muslim brothers and sisters who have decided they will not make that compromise. They will stay in rented apartments, rented homes, and will not move and take the mortgage and take the interest.
just understand the reason why I wear this.
Aram Naqvi turned the real drama of accommodation she faces every day into theater.
Oh, wait, can I ask you one thing? Like, is it true that your family bombed, like, World Trade Center, or did you bomb it?
When she joined her high school improv group, she helped write a sketch about the problems of wearing a headscarf.
Just because a Muslim is accused of bombing the World Trade Center does not mean that all Muslims are terrorists, okay?
Aram used to live in the Midwest, where she never wore a scarf. Yet as she grew into her teens and moved to Long Island, her identity as a Muslim began to take shape.
My mom doesn't really care. She didn't even expect me to wear my scarf. She doesn't wear it herself. In fact, she's just a normal American doctor like any other doctor, and she just doesn't go. She goes to work in normal American clothes. She doesn't wear scarves.
But why did you decide just a few months ago to cover your hair?
I wanted to prove to people that I'm religious, but that's not the reason I wore it. I wore it also because there were people in my school who would be annoying me and making fun of me, and just it was little harassment. It was just not they just used to make fun of me all the time and pull my hair or something. So I thought it was really important, so I started wearing my scarf.
Aram's play was an unusual approach, but the problem it addresses isn't. The hijab has become a symbol of the complex and controversial role of Muslim women in America. Although changing traditionally by Western standards, Muslim women are subservient and often discriminated against. In South Patterson's traditional community, the headscarf is barely noticed. But for other Muslim women, the hijab is a take-it-or-leave-it option, worn only on special occasions.
Do Muslim men ever comment about the fact that you don't cover your head?
Well, in the mosque, in the mosque I cover my head out of respect, because in the mosque you're supposed to cover. And once a man asked me, he said, how come you don't cover your head? And I said to him, how come you don't have a beard and you don't wear that turban and the long gown? Because that's Islamic too.
This question of hijab is an interesting one. If I put this like this, it becomes a controversy. If I put it like this, it becomes fashion.
But unfortunately, problems of adjustment can't always be turned aside with a joke. Until recently, Muslim communities in America were known to have especially low crime rates. But a year ago in Patterson, 2 Muslim teenagers were charged with the fatal beating of a local fireman outside a tavern on Main Street. The strains of adjustment have also shown up with the jabbers. Rowita, the softball player, is an honors student. But her older brother, Riyadh, was shot a year ago in a fight over money with a Hispanic youth, a fight that took place just a few blocks from their home. And this spring, Patterson police raided Ali Jabber's house, overturning furniture and tearing out walls and ceilings in a futile effort to find weapons they thought Riyadh had hidden in the home.
You don't believe how much we put pressure on them, on the kids. Hey, I don't want you to go out. I don't want you to hang around on Main Street. I don't want you to hang around here. I don't want you to hang around with this guy. I don't want you to... And sometimes they listen.
I think if the Muslim kids that are here now were overseas, it would be different, though.
Despite generational tensions, sometimes the old ways and the new ways do coexist peacefully. The parents of these kids are descended from the Karachai, a Turkic ethnic group that was once part of the Ottoman Empire. Many Karachai emigres wound up in Patterson, so they recently imported a professional dance teacher from Turkey to help keep the ethnic traditions alive.
Don't bend your head, don't sit down, don't forget it. Okay, ready? You start.
Lila Cato didn't want to go at first. She already knew ballet and jazz and tap. But her mother was one of the organizers of the dance group, so it was hard to resist. Tradition and family authority pulled her one way, the outside world pulled another. That's the way it often is for Muslim families in America today. Devout Muslims are not allowed to drink alcohol. nor are Muslim women allowed to date or even go out alone with a man before marriage.
When you bend your knee, just go like this.
So the dance class at PS9 served an unstated purpose. Besides keeping old traditions alive, it was also a place where Muslim boys and girls could be together under adult supervision. So far, Muslim life in America has been largely defined by just such strategies to deal with the everyday problems of adjustment and assimilation. But the next phase for Muslims in America may be far more difficult.
Islam is not synonymous with terrorism.
Since the World Trade Center bombing last February, Muslims across the country have been forced to battle the fears and suspicions of their neighbors. Many of them didn't want to believe that Sheikh Omar Abdel-Rahman might have sanctioned terrorism in the United States. But his indictment on charges of terrorist violence will undoubtedly deepen the suspicions of many Americans. Yet while some Muslims make headlines, others quietly continue the process of Americanization. During the same weeks that the case against Sheikh RAHMAN was being prepared, the girls' softball team at PS9 in Paterson, New Jersey, won the city championship.
Still to come on the NewsHour tonight, the U.S. role in Somalia and some people who fought the floodwaters.
Next, we focus on the changing U.S. mission in Somalia. President Bush sent 26,000 U.S. troops there last year to restore order and ensure that millions of Somalis were fed. That force was reduced to 4,000 Americans as part of a United Nations force. In June, the nature of the UN role changed when the forces of warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid killed 24 Pakistani soldiers. U.S. troops in helicopters led a retaliatory strike on Aidid, but failed to catch or kill him. In recent weeks, Aidid forces have killed and wounded more UN troops, including Americans. Yesterday, a force of 400 U.S. Rangers began arriving in Mogadishu, apparently to be used to neutralize Aidid. Today, Defense Secretary Les Aspin gave a fresh definition of the U.S. purpose and commitment.
The food emergency that galvanized international efforts on behalf of the Somali people effectively is over. As direct result of the United Nations humanitarian effort, catastrophic mass starvation was averted. This year's agriculture production is good. There are still pockets of hunger, but reports we receive from Mogadishu say that there is more than enough food to feed the Somali people. UN officials on the scene feel confident enough to bring the emergency food supply effort to a close. Emergency food deliveries, all emergency food deliveries, are scheduled to end this month. So on food, very good results. On economics and on the political reconstruction of the country, some progress has been made, but more work needs to be done. Some small shops are reopening, some schools and orphanages have reopened, and in central Somalia, former government employees are back on the job providing health and education services to the population. Overall, however, economic conditions remain dire, and progress towards political reconciliation has been stalled by the deteriorating security situation in the southern part of the capital. Clearly, UNISOM has to establish reasonable security in South Mogadishu, but it doesn't end there. Real progress must be made in reducing the heavy weapons in the hands of warlords, and effective police forces must be created. The overall effect must be so that no group of armed Somalis should be able to take over the country by force or to impose their political will and loot the markets. Make sure that no political entity, no warlords can do that. When these three conditions are met, South Mogadishu, heavy weapons, police forces in the major units, in the major population centers, then I believe that the U.S. quick reaction forces can come back. And we should also note that the most important element of any lasting solution in Somalia must be the Somali people. Just as the international community has invested greatly in creating conditions for political and economic growth in Somalia, so too must the people of Somalia invest themselves in the reconstruction of their own country. In the meantime, President Clinton has given us clear direction to stay the course with other nations to help Somalia once again provide for its people. This is what the new world asks of American leadership and American partnership.
The evolving U.S. role has prompted a new debate at home, and we sample it now. Andrew Natsios formerly oversaw the U.S. aid effort in Somalia. He's now Vice President of World Vision U.S. and Executive Director of World Vision Relief and Development. Said Samatar is a Somali who's a professor at Rutgers University. He's the managing editor of the Horn of Africa Journal. Mr. Natsios, what do you think of Les Aspin's rationale for the U.S. presence there now?
Well, I think his rationale was appropriate. The problem is I think he's beginning to forget, as some people are in the UN system, the original purpose behind the mission, which was not to take sides politically in Somalia. We are there to be neutral policemen until such time as security is restored and the country is moving again. And what's happening now is we are becoming a political force in the country, which is very inappropriate. If the Somali people don't want General Aidid, then they can vote against him at some point in the future when the elections are held. But simply going after him the way we have since June, I think, we think in World Vision is inappropriate. I might add, we supported the initial intervention, and we supported a response in June to General Aidid's massacre of those Pakistanis. There has to be, in every UN peacekeeping operation, a quick and strong reaction when police forces under the UN's control are attacked. But to go one step further and say we're going to eliminate General Aidid and his clan, which is what is implied by the sending of those rangers, is, I think, very inappropriate and misses the purpose behind the mission in the first place.
You are not disturbed by this turn of events, Mr. Samatar?
Well, I give this move a qualified support. First of all, it's news to me that the Americans have taken sides. I don't believe the Americans have taken sides. It is quite clear that General Aidid has forced the hand of the United Nations and the hand of the American troops when he deliberately massacred peacekeeping troops. As to the question of whether the Somali people want General Aidid or not, General Aidid is an armed warlord, and he has never known to abide by political elections.
Let me just clarify something. You have some history, personal history with Aidid yourself. You have some reason for animus with him yourself, right?
Well, I wouldn't call it animus. I would call it a kind of a Sunday-type quarrel. General Aidid at one time didn't like the broadcasts that I was making from Mogadishu and sort of threatened my life, and I had to leave the country. So it is true that Aidid and I are not personal friends, and even then I left him a book of mine which I autographed and said to him that I prayed that chance will allow us to meet in some better circumstances someday.
All right, just so I understood that. Now, should Aidid be left alone to exert his political influence now in Mogadishu, as Mr. Natsios suggests?
It depends on the terms by which he is left alone. If Aidid can be persuaded to just stay in the country like an ordinary Somali, participate in the political process, and indeed, as Mr. Natsios suggested, run for office in a fair election, that's fine and to the good. But if General Aidid's ambition is to impose himself on the Somali people by force, then that would be counterproductive.
Mr. Natsios?
I don't disagree with Professor Samatar. The problem is the action that was recently taken, it seems to me, goes far beyond that. By suggesting that we're going to either shoot him, which is what's been suggested by the UN now for several months, they're going to catch him and put him on trial, or they're going to kill him. We are involving ourselves in the political process of Somalia, and I think we're becoming actors when we're supposed to be neutral peacekeepers. When I say we, I mean the international community. And we in World Vision, and I think other PVOs, are nervous that we're going to ruin the very favorable initial model that was created by our the intervention of the international community earlier.
Well, what is the alternative to neutralizing Aidid now, whether he's killed or captured or sent into exile, which is a third alternative I've seen mentioned? What's the alternative to doing that when his men, according to the United Nations and the U.S. personnel there, are out every day attacking, laying bombs or exploding delayed action bombs under UN vehicles and killing UN peacekeepers?
Well, the first thing is catching General Aidid is not going to stop that activity. It's going to continue. The problem is the UN stopped talking to Aidid somewhere around March or April. I was there in April, and I was disturbed by reports that the UN officials were not talking to him any longer, as they were other political leaders. Now, he's not an easy man to deal with. The warlords are not our favorite people, believe me. But the fact is he is a figure of some power, and he needed to be dealt with. By refusing to deal with them, what essentially was happening was we gave him no option but to use violence. And that's what's happening. That's what we're seeing the consequences of now.
What do you say to that?
Of course, Mr. Natsios has put the problem on his finger conceptually. But I do not agree with the conclusion he's arrived at. My understanding is General Aidid has been welcomed to participate in the political process, and he was not satisfied with that. He wanted the UN and the world intervention in Somalia to be a means for him establishing himself in power in the country as a dictator.
Which he feels entitled to take power because he was the one that led the forces that overthrew the previous dictator, Siad Barre.
As a matter of fact, he feels that the country belongs to him by right of conquest, even though historically, in fact, he has not run Siad Barre out of town. It was general uprising that really ran Siad Barre out of town. General Aidid himself came in about a week later.
But, Mr. Natsios, the UN gives the impression now, all the statements, and the U.S. has gone along with this, even though the Defense Department has not said the Rangers are there specifically to get him, although the way they're trained might suggest that's what their mission was, that there is no alternative to getting rid of him now because, well, you heard Aspen say it again, that until the security situation in the statements, and the U.S. has gone along with this, even though the Defense Department has not said the Rangers are there specifically to get him, although the way they're trained might suggest that's what their mission was, that there is no alternative to getting rid of him now because, well, you heard Aspen say it again, that until the security situation in the south of Mogadishu is settled, there is a danger of the situation just deteriorating to what it was before the U.S. troops went in a year ago.
Well, at first, I think any time UN troops are attacked from the United States or from any country, there needs to be a response. And the notion that we should just sit there and let them shoot at us, as they do in Bosnia and in Cambodia before the elections, is nonsense. I think we need to respond. But we also need to keep open the political negotiating process, which, so far as I could tell, has been compromised by the attempt of the UN to intervene militarily. Well, I don't think we're putting enough emphasis. I might also add...
So I just want to make something clear. In saying you approved of the retaliation after the ambush and murder of the 24 Pakistanis, you're not joining that group of people who say that that was aggression. That response was aggression.
We at World Vision endorsed the initial response. Yeah. What happened is that response went on for a month and a half, which we thought was quite excessive. There were attacks against General Aidid's supporters in late July. So they kept this war up. Now, they did end that part of the combat operation sometime in late July, but I think they went too far, and they created the clear impression the UN was now no longer a neutral force, but had taken sides and was opposing not just General Aidid, but the Haba Gadir clan, which he is one of the leaders of. And I think that's where the UN is getting into trouble, and if we start doing that in other complex emergencies around the world, of which there are 17 now, the UN is not going to be able to function, because we're going to have our soldiers shot at constantly.
You, I presume, Mr. Samatar, agree with Secretary Aspen that unless Aidid, he didn't say this, but he said that unless the security situation in South Mogadishu is settled, other warlords would follow Aidid's example, you believe that to be the case and that the situation would deteriorate again?
Absolutely. In fact, a great deal is riding on the success. First of all, on the question of success, I have seen a lot of people who are claiming that the UN mission in Somalia has been a failure. In fact, I would say that the UN intervention in Somalia is a success story. And if you wanted to know a proof of that, one ought to visit Baidawa, the city that I called last year the city of death today. Farmers are harvesting bumper crops. Life is returning to normal all over Somalia. It is in this small locality in southern Mogadishu that is the problem. Now, if the UN cannot deal effectively with a single warlord, how are they going to deal with more complicated problems like Bosnia?
But what about Mr. Natsos' point that if they do, they will be perceived as taking sides politically and they will compromise similar UN roles in the future and in other places?
I don't believe so, because General Aidid and, for example, the Havar-Gidr clan are not one and the same. My information is that many of the Havar-Gidr people do not, in fact, support him, and that he has terrorized many of them. He has killed even some of the leaders of that clan. So the point on which I would respectfully disagree with Mr. Natsios is that were General Aidid to be removed, the Havar-Gidr clan would keep on fighting it.
Okay.
I doubt it.
Well, we have a disagreement on that, whether the UN is taking sides or not. What about this aspect now? Mr. Aspen says and the President says the U.S. quick reaction troops should stay there until the three conditions he laid out are met. What is your advice to the administration, Mr. Natsios, to pull them out?
I don't think they should have sent them in the first place. I mean, I have great regard for the U.S. military. I've been in the U.S. reserves for 20 years now. But sending the Delta Force in is an extraordinary symbol. I mean, they are among the toughest troops we have in the United States military. If you want to run a peacekeeping operation, send in military police or strengthen the police force, the Somali police force, which we started to set up in March. That should have been increased. They should have been armed. They're one of the best police forces, even under Saeed Barre, in Africa, one of the most honest and best disciplined and best trained. That's where the emphasis should be placed. The other point is, I think this operation is making General Aidid into a hero or a martyr. If they kill him, he'll be a martyr. If they don't capture him, the UN operation will look ineffective. So no matter what consequence or what conclusion takes place to this whole thing, I think we're going to fail. We're going to look bad. Now, I would agree with Professor Samatar, not the critics of the intervention, that the UN intervention has been successful up to this point. But what's happening now is we're entering a new stage, and it is the new stage that we are disputing. That we think they're going too far. The violence is going to escalate now rather than diminish. And we're making him into a larger political force than he really is. Professor Samatar is correct that in South Mogadishu, that is where the area of concern is. The countryside is improving. It's one of the bumper crops, the best bumper crops the country's had in years. It's being harvested right now. Food security is improving.
Let me just ask Mr. Samatar, what do you think? What's your reaction to Mr. Natsios that it's wrong to send this Delta Force?
I think first the idea that General Aidid is going to become a hero for Somalis is laughable. Aidid is detested by most Somalis. And I think it is quite clear that from the fact that he can't even visit other regions of the country because he fears for his life. Secondly, if you pull out now, I think that the outcome could be a nightmarish situation, because General Aidid, since he's still the most powerful because he has inherited practically 75% of the armaments belonging to the Somali army, he's going to use that equipment to terrorize Mogadishu and to then march on against the regions, and you will have the return of the humanitarian nightmare. That in the first place,
let me add, we don't support the withdrawal of UN troops right now. That would be a disaster. We're talking about those 400 Delta troops that send a terrible message.
I take your point, both of you gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.